All right. Mark chapter 6. Remind me to do some push-ups tonight, honey. Okay, so before we begin, there's a couple of times, I don't know how this is going to view, Josh. I'm going to have to come off the platform in a little bit to point. And I don't know whether we need to dim a couple of lights and such. But there's a couple of slides. First of all, there's a couple of areas that Jesus is going to minister specifically in this chapter. Now remember, he's up in the Galilean ministry during this earthly time. And so there's three places, and again, it's right around the Sea of Galilee. And then there's Nazareth, which is his hometown. And you'll see that in the first couple of verses that's going to come up. And then Geneseo, which is on the northwest side. And then Bethsaida, which is on the north side there. So mainly those three areas. Now last chapter, he was down in Gadara area and Capernaum. But all centered around the Sea of Galilee. Okay, so let's get right into the outline, and then a little bit later I'll come down and point to a couple of things here as we get to another chart. But he is going to actually do a lot of things happening. You think there's a lot happening last chapter. This is a lot happening here. Not only is he going to heal, he's going to teach, but he's going to feed the multitudes. He's going to walk on the water. His hometown rejects him. There's just a lot of things going on in this chapter. So let's get right into it. Number one, the malice of the Nazarenes. The malice of the Nazarenes. Letter A, their hostility. Remember, Jesus was from Nazareth, so look at verse 1. And he went out from thence and came into his own country, and the disciples follow him. And when the Sabbath day came, he began to teach in the synagogue. And many hearing him were astonished, saying, From whence hath this man these things? Whence hath this man these things? And what wisdom is this which is given unto him, that even such mighty works are wrought by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James, and Joseph, and Judah, and Simon? Are not his sisters here with us? And they were offended at him. So, a couple of comments. First of all, they are saying that Jesus has half-brothers and sisters, not like some Catholic religion sections believe. He did have siblings, and Mary continued to have children after Jesus. There's nothing immoral or dirty about that. It was a perfect relationship between her and Joseph. And the second thing is, here he is in this hometown, and they're like copying an attitude. Who does he think he is that's doing these mighty works and stuff? Isn't he just a carpenter son, you know? And so they've got this attitude. And so their hostility. Letter B, his helplessness. His helplessness. And I actually feel almost sacrilegious a little bit by using that word, because I don't want to indicate that God cannot do something. But God does not force himself upon people, and he wants to do things if people will put their faith in him. And so that's what I'm trying to get across here. But look at verse 4. But Jesus said to them, A prophet is not without honor, but in his own country, and among his own kin and his own house. And he could there do no mighty work, save or except that he laid his hands on a few sick folk, and he healed them. And he marveled because of their unbelief. And then he goes around to the different villages teaching. All right, so that's the malice of the Nazarenes. So he's going to shift his ministry a little bit to the other areas that we looked at earlier. Number 2, the mission of the 12. The mission of the 12. He, first of all, letter A, gives their assignments. He pulls the 12 aside and gives them clarity on what their objective is. In verse 7, he called unto him the 12 and began to send them forth by 2 and 2, and gave them power over unclean spirits, and commanded them that they should take nothing for their journey, save a staff only, no scrip, no bread, no money in their purse, but be shod with sandals and not put on 2 coats. And in other words, what he was saying was, look, you're going to be itinerant preachers. When I leave, he's telling his disciples, when I leave, you're going to continue the work. I'm going to give you some of the same power so it will authenticate that you're my men with my message. And you'll continue on the ministry, and churches will be formed from this. And so he's telling them this. He says, but your job is to get the word out. So don't pack a lot of belongings. Just get them out. And verse 11, whosoever shall not receive you nor hear you when you depart thence, shake off the dust off your feet. That's a phrase that basically says, don't let that slow you down. When people reject you, and they're going to, you just keep on keeping on. They're rejecting me. So don't get offended. Don't stop witnessing. Just keep on keeping on. And that's a good message for all of us to follow. Letter B, their accomplishments. Their accomplishments. He gave them their assignments. And then in verse 12 and 13, they went out and preached. And verse 13, they cast out many devils and anointed with oil many that were sick and healed them. So we got the malice of the Nazarenes, the mission of the 12. Number 3, the martyrdom of the Baptist. Now here's where I'm going to slow down just a little bit. Letter A, Jesus is misunderstood by Herod. Look at verse 14. And King Herod heard of him, referring to Jesus, for his name was spread abroad. And he said that John the Baptist was risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works do show forth themselves in him. Others said, this is Elias. Others said, this is that it is a prophet, or as one of the prophets. But when Herod heard thereof, he said, it is John, whom I beheaded. He is risen from the dead. So Herod is a little scared because he executed John the Baptist and is now scared that John the Baptist has come back to haunt him in the form of Jesus. And that's what he believes. So Jesus is misunderstood by Herod. Letter B, John is mistreated by Herod. So here's how the story plays out of how John, when he was still living, how he ended up getting beheaded. First of all, he's mistreated. So in verse 17, it's going to tell us what Herod does. Look at verse 17. For Herod himself had sent forth and laid hold upon John and bound him in prison for Herodias' sake, his brother Philip's wife, for he had married her. Now, it gets a little confusing. I'm going to show you a chart here in a little bit that will explain all this relationship. So fill in the blank here that John was arrested. John was arrested because they laid hold on John. Well, that's what Herod did. He arrested John. And why, number 2, why did Herod do that? Look at verse 18. It's because John was preaching. He said unto Herod, it's not lawful for thee to have thy brother's wife. Therefore Herodias had a quarrel against him and would have killed him, but she could not. For Herod feared John, knowing that he was a just man and a holy, and observed him. And when he had heard him, he did many things and heard him gladly. So, I don't think I have the chart yet. I think I have the next one. So, letter C, John is murdered by Herod. There's a couple of stories like this. In the Old Testament, there's the story that comes to my mind is Jezebel, where even though Ahab is the king, Jezebel's the one pulling the strings. In this story, Herodias is the one pulling the strings. It's a female, and she's got these men wrapped around her little finger. And women have influence. It's clear in the Bible. It's clear in history as well. The men may be the leader, but the women are the ones that control the leaders. And it's interesting. As the saying goes, the men are the head, but the women are the neck that turns the head. But John is murdered by Herod. I don't know if I gave you that point yet. Letter C, John is murdered by Herod. Number 1 is the party. The party. It's Herod's birthday. Hip, hip, hooray. So he's going to throw a big shindig. And it says in verse 21, when a convenient day was come, that Herod on his birthday made a supper to his lords, high captains, and chief estates of Galilee. So he's throwing this big thing here. And then number 2, there's a performance. Look at verse 22. And when the daughter of the said Herodias came in and danced and pleased Herod and them that sat with him, the king said unto the damsel, Ask of me whatsoever thou wilt, and I will give it thee. So that's number 2, the performance, as well as number 3, the promise. Okay, so let me tell you what's happening here before we get to the next point, and then I'll show it to you all on the chart. So here is a woman, Herodias is her name. She's married to a guy, but she hooks up with another guy and convinces him, and I'll show you on the chart, convinces him to leave his wife. So Herodias hooks up with this another guy, and they move. And now they're in this Galilean area, and John the Baptist comes by and it says, and preaches against them. You a bunch of adulterers, how dare you? This is sin. Well, Herodias, who's pulling the strings, doesn't like it. So what she does is okay, I don't have the power to execute John the Baptist. I don't like his preaching and tell me how to live my life. And so what he does, she's behind everything, and she comes up with a scheme. Tells her daughter to go do some belly dancing. I'm sure it was just like that, you know. And so she goes there, and of course Herod and all the guys are woohoo, watching the hips and everything flow, and he goes, you name it, it's yours. So then she goes to Mama and go, Herodias, Mama, what should I do? And then she's going to say, kill John the Baptist. And of course, daughter falls in line and goes to the king and says, off with his head. And then Herod regrets what he said and give her the promise. And I'm just going to skim this, what I just summarized there. Look at verse 24. She went forth and said unto her mother, that's Herodias, what shall I ask? She said, the head of John the Baptist. Verse 27, immediately the king sent an executioner, commanded his head to be brought, and he went and beheaded him in the prison. Now, what is a shocker to me, not a shocker, but just to show you how callous people are, verse 28, and brought his head in a charger and gave it to the damsel, and the damsel gave it to her mother. Can you just imagine? It's like a Mother's Day present, you know. Here's a head, John the Baptist's head, and it pleased her, you know, to have this head right in front of her, and just crazy. But anyway, number 4 is the plot. I don't know if I gave you that. It's all Herodias pulling the strings. All right, so here's the chart up here, and I'm going to try to point some things and try your best to look at all this. Can we have some lights dim down to just a little bit? Okay, so up here is Herod the Great. There's a lot of Herods. And by the way, the word Herod is kind of like a title, much like the word Pharaoh. It's just a title of a position. So you have several Herods in history. You have Herod the Great. He's the one that tried to kill Jesus. Well, Herod has several females of wives, and they each have children going down. So this is a chart. And so under this Malthus here, who's a Samaritan, they have children. And this lady right here, Miriam, has Herod Philip. So in the Bible, when you hear the word Philip, it's Herod Philip. When you see the word Herod here, it's this Herod, Herod Antipas. In fact, he's the guy that's mentioned most in all the Gospels, this guy, more so than Herod the Great. This guy right here. So what's happening? You see number 1 here, Herod the Great is there. Number 2 is talking about this Herod. He is actually in love or married to Herodias. They're married. And Mariam up here tries to overthrow Herod the Great, is in a plot to get rid of Herod the Great. Well, Herod the Great finds out about it, and he exiles her and Herod, her son. So Herod is married with Herodias, and they flee to Rome. While in Rome, they host Herod Antipas. Herodias and Herod Antipas strike up while they're hosting this guy, Antipas, strike up a romantic relationship. And they fall in love, and Herodias, convinces Herod to leave his wife, and she will leave Philip. And so they're in cahoots to divorce their husbands and wives so that they can get together. Once they divorce or get rid of their spouses, they leave and go into the Galilean area. Well, Herodias' daughter is by the name of Salome. Now, Salome is not mentioned in the Bible one time. The word daughter is, but Josephus, a famous Bible historian, names her. And so Salome is the one that's dancing and asks for John the Baptist's head. And John the Baptist is the one that rebukes the marriage of Herod and Herodias. And so it gets a little confusing. In fact, I had to reread some stuff this week just to make sure I understood it. And I got most of it before this, but this chart, I found this chart online, and it was so helpful to do this. Now, by the way, there's other Herods. There's Herod Agrippa. He's the one that imprisoned Peter. He executed James, the son of Zebedee. I mean, there's a lot of other relationships and things going on here. But just so you know that Herodias is in the middle of all this and pulling the strings. And she's ruining two different families, their children, the way things are handled in government, everything. It's all because of that woman right there. And much like Jezebel ran the kingdom there. All right, so that explains everything there. And I think I just accidentally clicked... I'll stay away from it, okay? I think I went backwards. All right, so let's get right into Roman numeral 4 and end this chapter, okay? I find that stuff so fascinating. I really do. I mean, it's amazing the influence one person can have. Not just a woman, but a woman on a man, and then the man will... And ladies, may I kindly say, use your influence in a godly way. You can destroy a man or you can help a man. You can destroy a church or you can help a church. I know of a church that folded, a brand new church start that folded because a woman's intent was to hurt the preacher. And she joined that church on purpose, flirted with the pastor. He fell and had a relationship with her, and the church collapsed within maybe a year and a half. And just women have influence. It could be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing. All right, so number 4, the rest of the chapter is going to talk about the miracles of Jesus, okay? And so it's going to go on for the next 26 verses. Some of these, in fact, to the two major ones, we're going to just briefly glide over because they're very popular stories, and you're probably very familiar with them. So letter A, feeding the 5,000. Feeding the 5,000. So the next several verses, verses 30 through 44, breaks it up in a chronology. Some verses happen before the actual miracle, some happen during the miracle, and then some events happen after the miracle. So in your notes, you should have those there. And if you wanted to read the verses later on for further study, you could. I'm just going to highlight just a few of the verses. So first of all, before the miracle actually took place, there is consideration. Look at verse 31. And he said unto them, Come ye yourselves apart into a desert place and rest a while. So he's considering the fatigue of the disciples. And he's asking them to come aside and rest a little while. Not only was a consideration, but then there was compassion. Compassion. As they departed into a desert place by ship privately, all the people were flocking and trying to find and head Jesus off at the pass, if you will. Verse 34, Jesus, when he came out, saw much people and was moved with compassion toward them because they were as sheep not having a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. So there's consideration, there's compassion, and then we have a command. A command. Verse 37, he gives them command 5 words. Give ye them to eat. And of course, they're a little baffled at that because how can we feed such a great multitude with the very little food that we have? So number 2 is during the miracle. First of all, we have the arrangement. And he's basically sitting them down by companies or little groups. Certain groups are this size, certain groups are this size, but nevertheless he's being organized in the way rather than just dump it and run. I remember years ago when I'm not saying this is a good thing, I'm just saying this is what I witnessed. I was not the bus captain, but I witnessed this as a bus worker. My freshman year of Bible college, we went into the projects, and on the big days, the college went into the projects and hired more buses, leased more buses to reach more people. And they had an opportunity to do that. And they bought all these ice cream and stuff for the kids to come. And we had a great crowd. A lot of kids got saved, baptized, and such. So I'm not demeaning that. But one thing they did not take into consideration was that the heat of that day was extremely hot. And the ice cream melted. And so instead of having a bunch of spoiled milk and ice cream and kids who are complaining, the bus captain set it outside and let the kids outside and said, "See ya," and he drove off. And he's like, I can't do anything about it. It was chaos. They were digging into it with their hands with ice cream. It was kind of funny to watch as a little bit because if I was a kid, I'd be in there too, you know. But at the same time, there was chaos, much like we see riots and such. But he had them arranged in a progression. And then we also see an acknowledgement. It says in verse 40, they sat him down by ranks and by hundreds and fifties. And when he had taken the 5 loaves and 2 fishes, he looked up to heaven and blessed and brake the loaves and gave them to his disciples and set before them. And so they just had some fish and some bread, but God multiplied it. But he made sure that in front of everyone, he acknowledged God who would be providing this miracle. And then after the miracle, we see the number of meals provided. That's the word you want to fill in there, meals. And it says they took up the 12 basket full of fragments under the fishes. And then the next word is men, because there were 5,000 men that ate. Who knows how many children and females and such, but nevertheless 5,000 men. And some believe 5,000 men is incorporating everybody, whether that's the whole crowd or just the males. You know, nevertheless, it's a multitude, a bunch of people. Certainly a miracle that God did. All right, so that's the feeding of the 5,000. Letter B, is walking on the water. First of all, there was an awareness. In verse 48, remember Jesus is on land, but they're in the midst of the sea, the disciples. In verse 48, it says he saw them toiling in rowing. So he was aware of their plight. And then we see the approach. That's when he comes walking on the water. They're alarmed because they can't believe it. Saw him walking on the water. And then we have an assurance because he says to them, "Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid." Look at verse 51 with me. And when he went up unto them into the ship, the wind ceased, and they were sore amazed in themselves beyond measure, and wondered. In other words, there was no physical, logical way this could happen, that he can cease the storm like that. And so there was amazement. Amazement. And the last several verses is just that he continues through the villages, the cities, the country, and helping those who are not only teaching, but helping the sick, healing the multitudes. As we close, consider verse 52. They considered not the miracles of the loaves, for their heart was hardened. And I just put a note down at the bottom. Hard hearts cause us not to dwell on him and what he's done. They did not consider certain things before because their heart was hardened. And oftentimes when my heart is hardened, and oftentimes when your heart is hardened, we don't think of him. We don't consider what he's done for us. And may God help us to keep a tender heart. Father, thank you so much, oh God, for this chapter that you preserved. And not only do we see some wonderful miracles and you taking time to, yes, be organized and all of those things. It's good detailed work for everyday practices of life. But also, Lord, you had compassion on the people. You saw them as not having a shepherd, and you helped them. You gave them guidance and direction. You gave them instruction. And then beyond that, you took care of their physical needs. Lord, you eased their fears. Lord, you're just an amazing God. You do all of those things today. When we are shocked or fearful or something like that, you calm us. You are our peace. You are our strength. You give us that instruction that we need. Thank you for being a God who does things for us, and help us to be a soft-hearted, yielding, humble person, mindful of the things that you have done, mindful of the things that you are doing in our life, and that the things that you have promised to do. You're such a great God. We lift you up. Thank you for this precious book. Bless these precious people in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you, folks.